Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is the Wednesday supplement that goes with our how to use Austrian Cavalry video that we did at the weekend. And this is traditionally the how to beat Austrian Cavalry. Now, I talked about quite a few tactics in that first video on how to get the most out of the Austrian Cavalry, not least of course the ability to divide the humongous Austrian Cavalry units into 2, 3 or 4 smaller ones, which for some reason I want to call the Kampfgruppe rule. It's definitely not Kampfgruppe, it's the Abteilung special rule. And that's the one that allows them to break down their units into smaller units. And I talked about how the Austrians can swarm their opponents with numerous units. And that really is at the basis of how to beat them. Now normally, I should say as well, these videos are usually 10 minutes long. This one may slightly go over because I want to talk about some points and counterpoints on how to use the Austrians in this one. So if you have seen that first video and you enjoyed it, but you think that something was perhaps missing, then this might be the video for you, even if you are an Austrian commander. So the key thing to remember is that when you break that massive unit of, say, Hussars or Dragoons down to smaller units, they are small units. So that means that they are stamina 2, and that makes them quite vulnerable to small arms fire. One of the big things with cavalry is that it is very vulnerable to small arms fire. So if you take, for instance, the French infantry are usually an attack column, they get a 3+ save with stamina 3, whereas something like a Dragoon has a 4+ save, only stamina 3. So it means that they're that little bit more fragile. The other thing, of course, with the infantry is even if they're shaken, they can stand there and blaze away. The cavalry, they can't advance towards the enemy, so they can't really do much unless they've got missile weapons, which is quite rare for cavalry. So how can we make sure that we attack our enemies and make the advantage of the fact that although they've got more units than us, they are smaller? Well, one of the key things is charge them with your cavalry. Now that sounds a bit obvious, but also a bit basic. What do I mean by charging them with your cavalry? And how will that help? So for argument's sake, you've got your enemy. He's in like an upside down T. So he's got 3 units at the front, 1 behind. That gives him the maximum +3 static combat res. How can we peel that away? Well, the obvious thing would be to charge one of the units on the flank. So again, if we're looking at an upside down T, it'd be one of the units that's on the end at the front. So you can charge one of those, and he's only got support to the side and rear. He'll only have +2 to his combat res instead of the +3 if you go for the unit in the middle. However, it can actually be better than that, and this is an occasion where you can force the Austrian player into making a mistake. If you charge against his cavalry, he can either stand or he can countercharge. Now, if he countercharges, his unit will countercharging, and that gives him +1 to hit, so he's probably going to go for that. What that means, however, is that his unit moves forward to meet your unit halfway. And this can often be more than enough to drag that unit away from its supports. If you can pull that enemy cavalry unit more than 6 inches away from its supports, suddenly it's unsupported. And your regiment of, say, Dragoons has the full 8 attacks, and his small unit's only got 6 attacks back. You're at stamina 3, he's only at stamina 2. So not only does he have less attacks, he's also got to do half as many successful hits as you. So in this instance, the Austrian commander might be wise to stand against your cavalry charge. Now, if he's not watched this video, he almost certainly won't. The idea of cavalry is that it should be charging at all times, so he will almost definitely declare a counter charge. If he has watched this video, though, he won't, so just be aware of that. But at least you're then hitting him on a 3+, he's hitting you back on a 4. And this is where your own supports can come in as well. Don't charge units in unsupported. If you've got a brigade of cavalry, say you've got the Infernal Brigade, so you've got 2 units of Hussars and a unit of Chasseurs, then make sure you issue that brigade order. If you're French, in fact, I think if you're any other nation other than Russians, and even Russians might be able to do it with cavalry, I'm not 100% sure, then you can always issue that brigade order. So make sure that you order the brigade. For instance, the 7th Hussars will charge with the 6th Hussars and the 13th Chasseurs supporting on each flank. Something like that is how you can word the order. That means that you can get the whole brigade in, and although your opponent is on +3 static res, because he's got 2 flanks and a rear, You've only got 2 flanks, so he's 1 up on you on there. You are hitting him on a 3+, he's only hitting you back on a 4+. So it's very much about isolating those small units. Now, another way you can do this is with firepower. If you can get enough troops, maybe a cannon or some infantry, to hit the 2 units on either side, then you can declare a charge on the middle unit, and suddenly, you know, if they're shaken, they can't advance towards the enemy, or, you know, anything like that. So, I mean, they can still support, so that's worth remembering. But if you can drive off their supporting cavalry, then that's often a very good way to go. And only stamina 2, it is possible with one average volley. Well, actually, no, you'd have to be quite lucky, because I'd have to fail 2 saving throws. So with 1 decent volley, you can shake the enemy, maybe stick a cannon shot into them afterwards, maybe drive them off, something like that. So far, so ordinary. How to defeat the enemy cavalry is in pretty much all of these videos. Use your own cavalry, use firepower, particularly artillery against them. Nothing new there. How's this going to help us with the Abteilung? Well, one of the things you can do, particularly if you're the French, is use l'ordre mixte. Now, I actually have huge problems with the l'ordre mixte rules in Black Powder, but as they stand, it means that you can have 2 lines of troops, and then on the end of that, so they form like 1 line in the middle, and then on either end, you've got an attack column. If the enemy charges those, you do not have to form square. Now, that's really important, because it means that if they charge one of your columns, you don't have to form square. That's great. You've still got the 3+ save, although there are some modifiers to that. But if they charge the units in line, then you can just stand and deliver a decent volley at them. Now, unlike with most enemy cavalry regiments, the firepower from 1 line of French troops is actually enough to cause an excess casualty on one of these small cavalry units, because they are only stamina 2, you've got 3 shots. Now, okay, you're hitting them on 3s, they've got a save. It's unlikely that you're going to do all 3 hits and wounds, but the possibility is there. There's certainly the possibility of you doing 2. So, by using l'ordre mixte, you can really help avoid the thing that really makes these small units of cavalry really strong, which is their mobility and their ability to put several units into square in 1 turn. Now, if you're not using French, if you're using a historical opponent, for argument's sake the British, then the best thing to do is stand 17.5 inches away and just volley fire at those bad boys. Use that first fire, get them disordered, get them shaken. As soon as possible, just put maximum firepower in there. Remember, your cavalry is going to be so much better than theirs. I mean, they're not even comparable. So you need to make sure that they go in the hardest hitting spot. If your opponent is using Abteilungs, this is one of the few occasions, and you're using British, I should say, this is one of the few occasions where I would say lighter cavalry should absolutely go in against their heavier counterparts. If you're charging with a unit of British Hussars, you're going to have 6 dice, your opponent's going to have 6 dice. He's got a 3+ save, you've only got a 4+ save, but you are re-rolling all your fails to hit, and you have that extra stamina. I wouldn't necessarily expect you to come out of that combat particularly smelling of roses, but it's certainly not one that I would be looking to avoid either. If I was using, say, Russian Hussars or French Hussars, that's probably not something that I'd fancy. I'd want to take, at the very least, Dragoons into that combat, possibly Cuirassiers of my own. But if you're using British, I think you can get away with using a lighter cavalry against those smaller units. Not something that most units can do, or most armies can do rather, but I think the British probably can. Looking at the other nations, the Russians, I think they would possibly struggle a little bit against that. They don't have very good musketry, and their cavalry is pretty good. It's going to have to try and get those Austrians to come forward, though, and isolate them and swarm them that way, which is, I guess it's not unrealistic for the Russians, to be fair. Again, they're going to struggle to get those brigade orders off, though. So just be a little aware with the Russians. The Austrians are probably not a great matchup for you. And of course, historically, the Austrians did fight the Russians, but how much effort the Austrians put into it, shall we say, is perhaps up for debate. And finally, this is why I said that this video may slightly go over 10 minutes. I hope you guys are okay with that. Is one thing that we didn't talk about in the last video is the context of the Austrian cavalry. Now, by context, I mean what their position is in the army and what the rest of the army is like around them. And suffice it to say, the army around them is superb. We've talked at length about how I think the Austrian infantry is incredibly powerful. And that means that the Austrian cavalry are always going to be operating from a decent place of strength, because they're going to have that solid Austrian infantry behind them or perhaps next to them. So that's something that you've always got to be aware of. If you want your cavalry to try and engage the Austrian infantry, perhaps make them form squares, you have to get through the Austrian cavalry first. And this is where I didn't really talk about it in the tactics, because I think it's more of a counter tactic, or it's a way of countering the counter tactics, I guess you could say. Is Austrian cavalry, I think, is at its absolute best when it's held in reserve, which is historically how it works. So that's very good work by the rules writers there. The potential of Austrian cavalry is incredibly strong, often better than its actual battlefield performance. For that reason, the Austrian commander really will do well to hold his cavalry back a little, wait for the French or whoever their opponent is to commit, and then send the cavalry in there. When the opponent is maybe 18-24 inches away from your line infantry, that's when you want to start trying to get them to form square. And that's what you, as the enemy commander, need to stop your opponent doing. Get your cavalry, be very, very aggressive with them. Push the Austrians back, force them to come at you. You want the Austrian cavalry to commit as soon as possible, because they are very fragile. They've only got those 2 stamina points. If they're using the small units, if they're using the large ones, then that's slightly different. We'll talk about that right at the end. But if they are using the Abteilung special rule, and most of the time I would be if I was an Austrian commander, then you really want to try and be very aggressive. Get in there. Don't let them come at you. Don't let them pick their battles, because they'll be able to attack you in the front and the side with supports if you do that. You need to go at them. You need to be aggressive. How many times have I said this about the French? Be aggressive, and never has that been more important than against the Austrians. Ideally, you want to chase off the enemy cavalry before the infantry are even in musket range. That would be the absolute ideal. You would then have free reign. Think of it a bit like modern warfare. You want air superiority. That's what cavalry gives you. It gives you the equivalent of air superiority. And you really desperately need that when you're playing the Austrians, because their infantry is so strong. Now, if the enemy does not use the Abteilung special rule, if they keep their regiments at their large size, what can you do against them then? Well, then the shoe goes onto the other foot almost. That's when you have the advantage in static res. And remember, I said in the Austrian cavalry video, static res is, I think, far stronger than actual combat res, because you know it's in place and it's not reliant on the dice. If your opponent's charging you with that large regiment of Cuirassiers, it's got 9 dice, it's hitting you on 3s, that's pretty scary. But you're charging back, you've got 8 dice, and you've got +3 to your static res, because you've got those support units there. That's the real reason why I would tend to use the Abteilung special rule for the Austrians if I can, is because you get so many units out of it. And remember, as I said in that video as well, if you get 4 small units out of a light cavalry regiment and 3 out of a heavy cavalry regiment, then that is the historical precedence. That's not you cheesing it. That's absolutely as it should be. So you get a lot of bang for your buck there. You're suddenly on plus. If you're going against that enemy large unit, they haven't used that, then suddenly they've got that 1 unit. You've got those 2 or 3 units. You're on the plus static combat res. Although they've got a lot of extra dice for you, they are relying on those rolls to go well for them. Remember, they don't get a reroll. They're not like the British. So a bad turn of dice and that 1 unit, you can wipe it out all in one go. For that reason, I would suggest that you always use the Abteilung. So, in summary, the Austrian cavalry is very, very strong. It is one of the most flexible formations in the game, which is a bit weird for Austrians, but there you go. In order to beat it, you need to isolate enemy units, pick on them with your stronger units. Remember, even a medium-sized unit is stronger than them. Try to go like for like. I would not go one step up. I wouldn't charge lights against mediums, mediums against heavies, unless you are British, in which case, go large. I think your light units are probably as good as their medium, potentially even their heavy units. Although if you do charge a heavy unit with Hussars or light dragoons from the British, that's probably going to be a stalemate, a draw. But, if you're happy trading off one of your light for one of their heavies, then that's fair enough. Try and get the cavalry out of the way as soon as possible so you can focus on forcing the enemy infantry into square, making them easier targets for your advancing infantry. And also, remember that the Austrian cavalry is best deployed as a reserve. So, I don't know how many times I need to say this to French players. I might even have to eventually learn this phrase in French. Be aggressive. Always be attacking with your French. Make sure that you fight the battle on your terms, not on the Austrian cavalry commander's terms. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to do a special announcement video either next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. But I would say, as a special treat for listening this long, thank you for listening this long, I'd just let you know that the Outpost, as you know, I'm an affiliate of the Outpost. There's a link in the description down below. If you use that, then you help the channel out. They are having a sale on at the moment. Now, the last time I checked, there were some Spanish infantry in there. There was some good stuff for the War of 1812, I know, because I bought a box of each, but there were 2 boxes. There's 1 box left. They had a lot of Duke of Marlborough stuff. So pop on there and see if there's anything that tickles your taste buds. And if there is, you'll be helping the channel out as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.